Welcome to the Discerning the Forms podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Nick, and I have with me, drumroll,
Anthony. Yo.
Hey. Welcome to
How's it
our
going, buddy?
crazy podcast. It's going well.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited because we are really going to open the lid in this podcast and explore like the craziest stuff. Everything from theology, politics, philosophy, weird philosophy too, right?
Yep. Esoteric, stuff.
Yeah.
I think economics. I think we're okay with talking about everything.
Yeah.
That there isn't
absolutely.
a subject that to me that theology and Christianity doesn't touch in some capacity. So
yes,
it's important that we engage it all.
Yes, absolutely. So, as we think about the world, I think a lot of podcasts, and I've listened to a lot of podcasts, and I think that sometimes we're so like scatterbrained in our thinking, like or hyper focused on one issue. I hear there's so many people doing like political podcasts right now, and what we wanted to kind of find a way to tether it all together because we think it can be.
Yeah.
And we're kind of strange like
thoughts,
that,
right? Is like modernity being fractured, and
Mhm.
there's a way in which like everything is just like chopped up into spheres, and
Yeah.
one sphere doesn't touch the other. Right? The empirical doesn't touch the religious. The metaphysical is just purely speculative. It's not real at all.
Atomized.
It's just like it's just so atomized.
Yeah.
So part of it is like we want to bring a cohesion to
Mm-hmm.
how we want to engage the world, rather than thinking about like I have to keep my religion separate from my politics. It's like, no, those things are intimately linked, especially for Christians. It's like those
Mhm.
things are so deeply interwoven that sometimes it's hard for people, I think, to discern the difference.
Yeah.
And some things get overly emphasized, and they mistakenly think it's right, like Christianity, but it's something else that's influencing it. So it's good to
absolutely
to bring the whole cohesion, to be able to discern, but with that discerning the different modes that we're engaging, while trying to keep it together.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is hard.
Yeah,
hard to do.
Yeah. So we'll probably have conversations about all sorts of things related to, religion, politics, economics, whatever. And hey, we're gonna have guests too. We're kind of cooking up all sorts of interesting people we're going to ask, and so definitely subscribe, follow us, whatever platform we're using.
Come on the journey.
Yeah.
Try and get your world cohesive.
Yeah, that's right.
As we're going to attempt to do through this podcast.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things we really want to do just in the introduction is, kind of let you get to know us and what we're about, what our journey is, and kind of, I don't know, we'll stroll down memory lane.
Where we're at.
Yeah.
Like where we're at right now.
Where you at?
Like where we kind of came from, where we are.
Yeah. How'd you get into this? How'd you get into... so I'll start with you.
A lot of unraveling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pitch it to you.
Sure. So I did not grow up in a Christian household. I became a Christian when I was about 18 years old, through some friends at an Assemblies of God church. I was in a band with them, and I met at like MHC, whatever.
Yeah.
Regardless, I was a musician primarily. Mostly my.
What'd you play?
Life. I was guitar.
Yeah.
Primarily, a lot of screaming, that kind of stuff. Did some touring.
That's fun.
It kind of went down a stroll memory lane last night, but with my dad and my brother.
Oh, cool.
So which is interesting because where I've ended up now, like just in terms of like, theologically, and how much like I didn't consider music to be a way of knowing God. Like in a way it was, but like the sort of musical framework of the universe never really occurred to me until like I read like Tolkien or something like a bunch of years ago. I'm like, oh yeah, the world is just music. There's a hum, there's music to everything. Everything is so for
That's
me
interesting.
this sort of intellectual journey I think started when I wanted to be a counselor. I wanted to help people and
Oh wow.
provide. Yeah, and then so I started off that journey, but then like I forgot. I don't know what like got enticed me about like Christian apologetics, but I maybe it was just like
Yeah.
engaging like atheism early as when you're a Christian. It's like you don't really know much, and you feel like really under. You can't really defend yourself, or you don't really know much else. And so for me, I'm a very
Right.
curious mind, and I want to be able to. I just want to know that I know the truth. So I started getting the gauging the world of apologetics more broadly, and I think it started with like I think the Westminster Theological Seminary. They had podcasts on maybe it was John Frame,
Oh
and then I
yeah.
started listening. I
Yeah, I
started
love
listening to
Frame.
some of that stuff. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Frame. Yeah, he definitely introduced me to a wider world of philosophy. But
Mm-hmm.
so I started listening to that stuff, and then I encountered William Lane Craig, which I think for a lot of people who are, if you're into this kind of world, you're going to know who that is. He's a Christian philosopher. I think he
Mm-hmm.
teaches at Biola. Really brilliant guy.
Fun to watch
Um,
his debates online. I think
yeah,
for everybody,
yeah,
both sides of whatever he's debating, he's fun because he's so
very. Yeah, I think
cordial. You know, he's not a
hmm
jerk or anything.
he's very scholarly.
Yeah.
He's so scholarly. And so part of that too is like just engaging that world to me was important because I was encountering a lot of stuff that I didn't know how to deal with. Right. So this is maybe that's just sort of like a classic. You get into apologetics because you don't know how to engage things deeper. So that was very William Lane Craig was a very helpful introduction into that, and so that pushed me further. And then going further into that, I was sort of like in the evidentialist sort of camp, which just means you believe things that has majority evidence. You learn
Mm-hmm.
how to read evidence, and so that's kind of where I was. And then I started having these sort of existential crises, like, well, even if there is evidence, there it still doesn't mean there is anything at all, right? So
Right.
like for me, that
Huh.
really freaked me out. Oh no,
That's a
like
good
because
point.
initially when I became a Christian early on in my life, I had a very difficult time following through on anything, like finishing anything out, besides maybe like high school and barely at that. So like this whole time, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm not gonna make it as a Christian. Like I don't know if I can believe for the rest of my life. That seems crazy to me. And then in comes Alvin Plantinga, who is like seriously,
Mm-hmm.
for anybody who knows Alvin Plantinga, just really brought seriousness to Christian philosophy in the broader philosophical world. And his book on his sort of reformed epistemology was like sort of
Oh yeah.
a life raft for me. Like I was like kind of drowning for a little bit, and then I started reading that. And I'm like, oh, this is like what really like kind of gave me a breath of new life in terms of believing and
Yeah.
rationality, reason. And so if anybody doesn't know, reformed epistemology just talks about your faculties in your
Mm-hmm.
mind working properly, and that's how you can discern truth in the world. And we are fallen, so our faculties are not always properly functioning.
Mm.
And faculties just means like the intellect, our ability to perceive things with our eyes and our mind and our hearts. He uses John Calvin, so it's steeped in sort of a reformed-ish world. John Calvin
Yeah.
primarily. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that was a really big moment for me. But then the analytic world just like really started to get dry and boring to me. Like I wasn't really finding
Mm-hmm.
the sort of emotional and existential depth that I needed. It was very helpful for a time, and it really
Mm-hmm.
carried me.
So when you
But then
mean,
like sort of,
yeah, yeah.
sorry,
No,
go ahead.
yeah. So when you mean analytic, do you mean maybe describe that
Right.
for
So
someone who
the
might not know? Yeah.
yeah, sorry. So I mean the analytical school of philosophy. So like there's in philosophy there's generally two schools of doing philosophy, right? So the analytical school is more really rigorous on argumentation and logic. And so you have like your syllogisms, your the way you formulate arguments has to follow a specific logical pattern, and that's how you come to your conclusions.
Yeah.
And then there's the continental world, which is more, I would say, explorative. They're really concerned about like language, the development of language, and it just a very different way of engaging philosophy. So that's kind of generally what I mean. The analytical method to me was really where Plantinga is very much, he's an analytical Christian philosopher, and
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of that stuff
So
to
it's
me,
drying out for you.
yeah, it got very
Yeah.
flat. Not that it isn't helpful or isn't
Right.
a way
Mm-hmm.
that people can live and exist in that. Because I know many of my acquaintances who actually like literally wrote their PhD dissertations on planning as epistemology. Um, so like it is, people are doing it, and it is probably doing some good work. So, but for me, it lacked the existential depth, because the world is far more than just the intellect, and even faith itself to me is
Mm-hmm.
far more than just intellectual ascension to like right doctrine and right belief, right? Like that's a part
Absolutely.
of what's going on when faith comes into your life, but the reality is it's like it's a holistic sort of your entire mind, body, soul, and the experience around you also is a part of how you're engaging God, like film, music, food, like all these things like are a part of um, the way in which we know God. So for me, the analytical school reduces faith to for me, right? So it reduces it too much to an intellectual exercise, and that keeps a lot of people sort of out of the room from really, really engaging deeper that way, because you sort of have to like read a little bit in it. You sort of have to have like a mind to, and for me, like my mind doesn't quite work like that.
Yeah. I hear
So
you.
basically, so to push the story
Yeah.
forward, Kierkegaard, Soren Kierkegaard,
Mm.
Christian, basically the first existentialist, I think, in the philosophical world, Christian, Lutheran.
Mm-hmm.
He was sort of like this explosion for me, where so long faith and even philosophical, the philosophical world to me was such an intellectually, like I could distance myself. This is what I learned through Kierkegaard, right? Like doctrine can be a way that you can distance yourself from God and from the truth, and actually be a layer of
That's
protection from you ever
interesting.
having to encounter,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like encountering God. It's really true.
So
You can
powerful.
see this in, yeah, in any sort of theological school and philosophical, like there's these
Mm-hmm.
ways in which we try to control what's in our life, and doing philosophy that way. Not all, not, but this is what it was like for me. It was like it was a way in which I could shield myself from God and not be vulnerable, because I know I have the right belief system. I argue correctly, and like it can be this sort of fake out for knowing who God is. So Soren Kierkegaard comes in
That's
and just like
interesting.
literally like smashes my world apart. And then so I sort of, the way I've processed it is like I realize I had this, I go through these obsessions with these different thinkers. That's how I sort of have processed my intellectual journey. And then Karl Barth came in, and then David Bentley Hart was like the
Oh yeah.
real. This is
Mm-hmm.
when it started for me to like it like, and we'll get into that more. But like
Oh yeah.
David Bentley Hart, fundamentally, he's an Eastern Orthodox philosopher theologian, fundamentally shifted the way. And James K. Smith too as well. He was like,
Yeah.
so for
Me
it was
too.
Bart, then
Mm-hmm.
James K. Smith, and he was, and I'm sure, yeah, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
and Peter Lightheart as well. There's a lot of these
Mm-hmm.
thinkers right now that are like, those are like the main.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I've ended up. It's because of guys like James K. Smith, Peter Lightheart, David Bentley Hart, and John Milbank. And there's others too,
Yes.
but those four are like probably the most important to me in terms of
Mm-hmm.
where I'm at right now. So, and we can get into that more, but just basically, um, I go from like more of the analytical mind to like this sort of kind of postmodern,
Mm-hmm.
um, but not quite like sort of, so radical orthodoxy is something John Milbank and
Mm-hmm.
all four of those guys actually are into, but it's basically the idea that the postmodern condition, which is truth is only located in its context, not broadly universally, right? So there's no universal like thing to ascend to. It's only, truth is only found at a local sort of contextual level, where guys in radical orthodoxy like John Milbank and Catherine Pickstock, where they talk about how it's this opportunity for Christianity to like show itself in its primacy of like, yeah, there seems to be flux in the world, but that's actually like points to God, the one who unites things, and I could, that's gonna have to take some more unpacking, but basically, um, I've come to a point where, like you said, I think in the beginning, where it's more of an exploratory epistemology,
Yeah.
where the phenomenal world, where the things we experience is also a form of knowledge and a form of
Mm-hmm.
knowing, just as just as true as empirical or logical, right? All these things are a part of
Mm-hmm.
our experience, is the way that we know God and the way God like appears to us and comes to us. So
Yeah.
that's where I'm at basically. I don't know if that's helpful for people out there, but that's sort of,
Yeah.
at least basically that's where
Yeah.
I'm at.
Yeah, and I know we'll probably be putting this on some radical platforms. What was your political journey like? I know that's kind of goofy, and people think it's different, but I mean, there's a whole theopolitics is
It's
really
connected.
popular right now, and it's
Yeah, it's
so
very
yeah.
connected.
So what does that look
Yeah.
like? And you don't have
So
to
I
go into
think,
like a ton of detail, but like take us. Are you a millennial,
yeah,
right? Are you? How
I'm
old are you?
technically a millennial. I'm
Yeah,
35.
you're
I'm
35. I'm
technically a
30.
millennial.
Well, I can't
You're
remember how.
37?
37.
Yeah,
Yeah.
37?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we're elder
So
millennials now.
we're
I got
elder.
white on my chin now.
I don't have any white yet. I'm still
Yeah.
pretty dark here.
I
I'm
think I
thinning on
got
top
that
a
at
little bit, I think,
35.
but
So you might still
yeah,
have a I don't
it
know.
might happen. It might come
Yeah.
through, which is cool to me. I would be okay with that happening.
Yeah.
But
So like we
so
went through the Bush years. Did
politically,
you go through the Bush
y-
years? Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, the
So
edge of it.
I grew up. Yeah, I grew up in a conservative household. My parents really hated Bill Clinton. I remember that being a big thing in my house, like Bill Clinton,
Oh yeah. The whole
and then
scandal. That was
the
huge.
whole scandal, which that's a big deal. But
Right.
there's a whole other world we're going to talk about later. But
Yeah.
so I grew up pretty conservative. My parents voted for Bush, and I think I voted for him the second time. So it's the first regret of my life. Not that I regretted that I didn't vote for John Kerry, because I wouldn't have voted for that guy either, just to get my cards on the table right away.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like I would say I grew up in a very conservative household, and then which really pushed me towards a more libertarian perspective. Well,
Mhm.
even becoming a Christian really shifted my perspective on
Hmm.
things like war.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to be a Christian and be a conservative, because it seemed like conservatism was like obsessed with going to war with like Iraq, and so
Yeah,
I was like, I'm
especially
not
in the
really,
90s. What was that? Yeah.
yeah. Well, the 90s, the early 2000s, it was like
Yeah,
this
yeah.
obsession,
After
which,
Vietnam. I don't know.
gosh, yeah. So basically, I Ron Paul appeared in 2008 for me, and that was
Mhm.
like the game changer for me. I was like, oh, I can be like sort of fiscally free market guy, but I can also really hate war and the war machine. He like gave me Ron Paul opened up this space for me to be able to pursue the idea of peace at every level and not have to support candidates like John McCain, or
Yeah.
even guys like Barack Obama, who
Mhm.
he was not a peacemaker, as I
Mhm.
think you see when you go back in his presidency. But so I went into like a libertarian anarchist phase, like an ANCAP phase,
Mhm.
um, which lasted a while. I was very angry. I hated police abuse. I was like speaking out about that. People
Yeah,
would
yeah.
argue with me.
Absolutely.
Even less would be like, "How can you say that about?" Whatever. So I would get
Yeah.
these arguments all the time. It always cause problems. My wife would be like, why are you doing that? Like, stop arguing online." And she still tells me that till this day. Like, stop going on threads and arguing. But I can't help myself sometimes. But
Yeah.
so then I transitioned to and sort of my church journey was an integral part of why my politics began to really shift more broadly. I wasn't so obsessed about, well, here. So I was into the libertarianism, and Austrian economics was also really important to me, and it still kind of is actually. So
Yeah, yeah.
that hasn't shifted much, just interpreting, markets and boom
Yeah,
bust
once you
cycles,
bite
and
the bullet of markets, it's kind of hard to unsee it, you know.
so it's really,
Yeah.
you can't detangle that. Once
Yeah.
you start seeing the way central banks function,
Right.
it's impossible to escape that, because it's just so true. There's no other way of interpreting it, in my opinion, and the way I see it. But um, so I was in libertarianism for a while. I got really disenchanted with no disenchanted wrong. I got very I got very irritated at the Libertarian Party. I'm like, you guys are just clowns. I don't support any of you. You're all just like wanting to do things. I'm like, this has nothing to do with
Mhm.
libertarianism. Ultimately, it's not like it's all the. I think it's a lot more of the leftist sort of socialist libertarians
Yeah.
that sort of run the party. I think, and I'm like, I don't really care about you
Yeah,
guys
now there's like
anymore.
the
Uh,
Mises caucus and they're trying to take over the Libertarian
yes,
Party, which I say go
so
for it, but yeah,
they're better. They're
they're
much
better.
better. I prefer them. I prefer them ultimately. So I went
At
through
least
this sort
they're
of
honest.
libertarian phase. Yeah, they're more honest, I
Yeah.
think, and they're more critical where they need to be critical. I think they're critical in the right ways, where sometimes libertarians aren't always like properly critical. And again, can go in our political episode.
Yeah,
There's these
we'll have
tangents,
one of those.
but,
Yeah.
but so through my libertarian phase, I started to shift a little bit around 2016. I thought Trump was an interesting idea. Not I didn't vote for him that time because I didn't really believe in voting as a libertarian. I just
Yeah.
like, it's all rigged, and I still think that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I started getting really disillusioned with the idea of like the free market being the end in itself, right? So, and then 2020 last year was a really, really like eye-opening year for like, okay, big tech companies have now started to take the function of like this authoritarian, like, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Facebook, whatever sort of major media outlet is on these platforms, they are running the narrative, and anything that's counter to that narrative gets immediately shut down. And that means like Donald Trump is banned from life from Facebook, which, however you want to feel about that, is fine. But like, there's a real danger in like the shaping of public discourse on
Mm-hmm.
these platforms. And
Right.
then
Yeah.
big corporations like Walmart, Target, any of these major sort of box
Mm-hmm.
chain stores during the lockdown last year, they all got to stay open, but
Yeah.
all the small businesses had to shut down. And I didn't quite
Yeah.
understand that because I didn't
They
understand
weren't
why it was
essential.
safer to these hurt. Yeah, right. The language of essential. Like, so this stuff like really peaked. The alarm
Yeah.
bells were going off early
Mm-hmm.
last year, and like, okay, something's happening. But so that really radicalized me in like recognizing like the nature of corporations nowadays, which I guess I always sort of knew as a libertarian. It's like there's no real free true market if we want to talk about like actual like competition. And it
Yeah.
just shows last
There's
year
no
there's
Ancapistan.
no Ancapistan, which I don't want that anyways anymore. That's not a part of my like what I think the good is.
Yeah.
I think that's another conversation that libertarians see the good as, and I think they're both American Republicans and Democrats both see like the ultimate good is like the ability to express yourself fully without hindrance, and they just differ on how you're supposed to do that. They both want to control the other side, and then you got but again, so I think I'm like an anarcho-monarchist, if that makes any sense. I think Tolkien was
Interesting.
this, Salvador Dali, David Bentley Hart has a whole article about this.
Hmm.
Just the idea that my ideal version of politics is like, look at a chessboard. The king is the most important piece, but he can do the least amount of things,
Mm-hmm.
right? But he's still the most important thing, and he is like the whole point of the game.
Hmm.
But he has the least amount of power out
Yeah.
of all the essentially, right? So
Interesting.
there's something to that idea. I don't know what that looks like ultimately, but I guess I would say that like I'm also like more of an Anglo-British conservative by the way of like Roger Scruton, and just a way that is trying to incorporate more things than just like American conservatism's more neoliberal in its
Mm-hmm.
like philosophical outlook, which just means
Mm-hmm.
like freedom of choice is like the most important thing you could have, and like you have to like have that completely unhindered by like state intervention, um which I think is problematic at its core, and it views people in a way that I don't think people are, right? So that's like the main
Interesting.
problem I have with any political party. It's like
Mm-hmm.
their anthropology to me is poisoned by the idea of like people are born neutral, and they're born like without as a blank slate. I think John Locke is like the main proponent of this,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, that that the political sphere is somehow neutral, and you just have to engage it, and there has to be a separation of religion and the state because it's bad for some reason, which I don't really know why we think that, other than like the British tax the tea bags or something. I don't know what it is, but um, I don't know. I'm probably like sounding
Because
like
it.
a complete
Yeah.
idiot right now, but
Yeah.
so basically it's like my theology, my philosophy, it's a little more complicated, it's a little more exploratory. I'm not beholden to any specific ideology. Like, I'm not like a purist in the sense of like, libertarians are purists about like
Like the
free market
ism. You're
economics.
dropping all the isms, right?
I'm
Yeah.
dropping the isms. That's
Yeah.
sort of the journey. And
Yeah.
in the journey with the sort of theology, it's like
Yeah.
I'm trying to drop the isms. I'm not trying to be like a Thomist or like a Bardian
Yeah.
I'm just trying to be like a Christian who's being faithful to the witness of Scripture,
Mm-hmm.
and that comes about in a more complicated way sometimes, especially when you engage intellectually broadly. So that's sort of
Yeah.
where I'm at. I'm sure none of this has made any sense. It sounds like rambling, but that's sort of the journey. I think if
If it
anybody's really
interests
honest with
you
themselves,
and you're
yes,
listening, look it up.
yeah,
Like look up people that he mentioned, like David Bentley Hart. Like it's opens up a
James K.
whole
Smith,
world. Yeah.
it does. James
Yeah.
K. Smith in particular is a real for
Oh yeah.
Protestants who
Mm-hmm.
are listening. He's a real primer for this broader world of like liturgical
Mm-hmm.
theology and just the
Open
idea of
source
your
liturgy.
life is
Yeah.
yeah open source, like your
Yeah.
life is, you have liturgies in your life, and
Mm-hmm.
whether they're intentional or unintentional, and these habits are what form you into a person, and it's not about like ideas ultimately, it's about like your loves and your desires. And so this can be a real, I think,
Yeah.
real eye opener in real good a real good way of broadening your perspective on Christianity too. I think
Yeah.
James K. Smith is really excellent for that. And then you get sort of Smith pilled, and then you can get really
Mm-hmm.
nuts with it like I have. So, and you
Yeah.
have, I think, as well. So
Yeah.
it's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That's awesome.
but I'm interested, dude. I'm interested in your story as much as you're interested in mine. So theologically, like, what was your journey
Yeah.
like?
Well, I guess mine's similar to yours in the beginning. I guess one difference. Well, I'll talk about the political later, but so I'll talk like you did, the theology first and then the political. So like for me, theologically, yeah, I started struggling with my faith in my early 20s, and I had just all my friends were losing their faith. That was the age of the um,
The
the new
deconstruction?
atheists and all that. Yeah,
Yeah, the new
everybody was
atheist. Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
all the teenagers read like God Delusion and started losing their faith, and so
Oh, goodness
which was kind
gracious.
of goofy, but
Which
like
is
you could have at
sad
least
because
lost your faith in a
sad,
little better book,
sad.
Yeah, I don't know.
Right, like
Yeah,
somebody better, like Nietzsche or something, to
yeah,
radicalize you. I find that to
yeah,
be more enchanting than
yeah,
Richard Dawkins
yeah,
or Sam Harris.
yeah.
But
I grew up in the
continue.
church. I've been a Christian, and yeah, for me, and I had a similar background to you. It was more like charismatic evangelical, and we were a little bit like I cut my teeth on Wayne Grudem or something. Like it was
Oh, sure.
like
Yeah.
kind of reformed and charismatic, although more on the evangelical side. Like people that didn't matter. There are probably all sorts of different kinds of theologies among the congregation, but yeah, it was kind of in community church. I'm a smaller town, rural community. Um, and uh, yeah, grew up a pastor's kid, but yeah, I started struggling with my faith in my early 20s, and my brother-in-law, um, because we were just early married, me and my wife, and he was like, "Hey, you should read Case for Christ," and so I read Case for
Classic.
Christ,
Yeah.
and um, and I take yeah, this is all that apologetics, so I took like the people he was interviewing in the book. I still like it's been so long I can't remember it, but I
I've
know he
actually
had
never read it. I've never
yeah.
read it.
I'm sure he had like William Lane Craig in
Yeah.
there and N.T. Wright and stuff
Hmm.
as the uh
Oh, you know, it's
yeah.
Habermas.
Yeah,
I think that's a big
Habermas
guy
is
for
in
him.
there.
Is a big guy.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
just somehow I found N.T. Wright right away. N.T. Wright and
Oh.
William Lane Craig. And
Hmm.
yeah, so I got into the apologetics there, Reformed theology too.
Hmm.
Like I said, like
Yep.
I kind of had an orientation there, but I was also losing kind of my faith in the dispensational world. And so
Is that
anyway,
what you grew up in a dispensational
it
perspective?
actually was funny. My dad's Amil, my mom was
Oh.
dispensational, and so it was just something
Whoa.
they kind of like
Yeah.
it. He would always kind of challenge. It was one of those things like we didn't overemphasize it. Like it was like, hey, there's these different views
Mhm.
and whatever. But
Yeah.
growing up, I always had that rapture theology in my head from my mom, because she did the
Yeah.
teaching.
Could like so
Yeah,
that's the
yeah,
dispensational theology is
yeah,
like
yeah,
obsessed about rapture and
yeah.
like things getting really bad after the
Rapture
rapture, right?
theology,
So like
end
Left
times.
Behind is like the
Yeah,
perfect
yeah,
expression of dispensational theology. And
absolutely.
amillennial, how would you describe
Okay,
amillennial
yeah, yeah.
like
All
theology?
millennial. Yeah, yeah. So in the last chapters of the book of Revelation, which is an obscure book in the first place, but evangelicals have taken on this really complex way of reading it, and in the last chapters it speaks of a millennium, a period of 1,000 years where the Lord reigns. And so amillennials see this as a figurative age of, time during of the church, and they don't believe in a literal 1,000 years. And then the Lord
Yes.
will return at, when
Yeah.
the fullness of that has come, and in a
Yeah.
long period of time. So, anyways,
Those
but
diverge pretty sharply.
yeah,
Just to
right. So
they diverge very
people
sharply.
that have no idea about this, I mean, it would, you don't get bogged down by it, but that was there was kind of there's like a pessimistic version of Christianity and a more optimistic one. So I kind of
Yes.
was losing my faith in the kind of pessimistic version of it, where everything's going to get destroyed and Jesus comes, and even all millennials, and he comes, takes his ball, and goes home, and fixes everything, throws Satan in the lake of fire, and everybody burns in eternal hell forever. But so I was kind of like, but there's so many things I was in the early stages of that when I was first exposed to that. I got into theology and all that kind of thing more deeply and more critically, and I was into apologetics and stuff. And the first experience I had of like people searching was like the emergent church, so it was like,
Sure.
man,
yeah.
who was in that? Rob Bell and all those folks.
Rob Bell, he was a figure in my life early on around there.
Yeah,
Early
it was
on
about that time.
the videos. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he had those videos,
Some
and
of those were cool.
Yeah, those were neat.
Those were okay. Yeah.
And so there was a time, I kind of explored that, but it was actually kind of being introduced to interestingly the presuppositional world that you mentioned, right, the certain version of apologetics. Like I was losing my faith in the evidentialism, kind of like you did. Like I just felt like finding evidences for God, that's not how I became a Christian. Like I couldn't resonate. I got to a point where that wasn't resonating with me anymore, and that kind of stronger presuppositionalism, like Greg Bahnsen or something, was interesting to me. But then I kind of shifted there too. So I kind of went and went beyond the Reformed tradition, and like you started getting more into Barth, and like almost I'd always been attracted to Eastern Orthodoxy for a long time, but
that's something
Eastern
I didn't mention. But yes, my both of us, I think, have a very big love affair with the Eastern block of Christianity. Yeah.
So so that was kind of part of my journey, and then reading and then getting into philosophy and philosophical theology. I really got into into like semiotics and deconstruction, but then like different interpreters of Hegel, whether it was Charles Taylor, or even in the analytic tradition, Robert Brandom, or the pragmatists. But I kind of landed on Charles Sanders Peirce and got myself wound into his like a postmodern way of using his semiotics. And but I kind of was David Bentley Hart was introduced to him. There's just so many that once you open yourself up to that world, like it of better you kind of take that next step in theology, and you start.
Well, it's like it's like you move from like apologetics is like this sort of low tier like theological dialogue. It's more like it's more philosophies informing theology. Where then you like sort of break open, like Barth was sort of the door, the way into like
theology, just kind of
it incorporates it encompasses everything. It becomes like the primary thing, and then philosophy just sort of undergirds it, and like you can use that for how you will. But once you open up to that broader world, it's just this beautiful endless cacophony of just like excellent stuff that is really helpful.
And I guess the strange parts of my journey is and this goes along with kind of breaking down my the eschatology, which is study of the last things, like I was talking about before. I was reading
Yeah.
Postmillennial, so that gets you into the Reconstructionists and all sorts of
Mhm.
really weird
Right.
characters. But
Very, very
yeah,
oddball. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
that's where I discovered like, um, well, during that time too. I don't know if you remember this, but in the reform world, there was the whole federal visionist controversy, and I was
I wasn't a part of it then, but
yeah,
I knew about it because I started
yeah,
loving Peter Lightheart, and I'm like,
yeah,
why is everyone what's
yeah.
so
What's
controversial
he
about this
doing?
guy? But then
Yeah,
I read, I'm like,
yeah.
oh, okay, so he
Back
was
in
just
those days,
he took the logical conclusion.
yeah,
Yeah,
he kept getting
but
in trouble and having to go, and he was charged with heresy several times. And it's funny, one of the guys who I can't even remember this story is so long ago, but one of the original guys who charged him with heresy actually became a Roman Catholic, and they were trying to say Peter Lightheart was too Roman Catholic, and so
that's so funny.
I
I
know,
didn't know that. That's so
yeah,
funny to me.
it's hilarious. But that kind of got me into the
Yeah.
liturgical world, and of course,
Mhm.
because that was a trajectory. Most of these Ray Sutton, who's in the ACNA, um,
Sure. Yeah.
Peter Lightheart and James Jordan now
Mhm.
have the Theopolis Institute, and so liturgy was going that
Yeah.
direction. And at the time also discovering James K. Smith and that kind of thing. But
Oh yeah.
yeah, and then
Yep.
through that kind of my road to semiotics was discovering more of the
Mhm.
continental philosophers, and like you had mentioned, and postmodern
Mhm.
thinkers, because I thought there was a way that it could, like radical orthodoxy, where there's a critique
Yeah.
of it that can come that engages with it a little more carefully and also takes
Mhm.
in what's like Peter or like Stanley Hauerwas says, we plunder the gold from the
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Egyptians, there. So
Yeah, no,
all
that's a good way of putting
yeah.
it. I would say one thing. I thought about how I wanted to explain radical orthodoxy was like
Mm-hmm.
they recognize postmodern philosophy, but like
Mm-hmm.
they recognize it as like nothing can escape metaphysics.
Mm.
Nothing can. Even the postmodern perspective has
Yeah.
a metaphysics to it,
Yeah.
but the Trinitarian metaphysics is the best
Yeah.
metaphysics
Yeah.
to do anything. So that's sort of their perspective, I
Yeah.
think. Like very simply, but that's
Mm-hmm.
how I've sort of like
Yeah.
ascertained from that all their
Yeah, that's
writing.
good.
So
Yeah, so
yeah.
then nowadays I'm into, I've been reading a lot of Rene Girard and trying to understand that in the light of semiotics, like I'd
Yeah,
been
sure.
into before. So semiotics, for someone who doesn't know, is the study of signs. And
Hmm.
for so long we'd been using this kind of binary view of signs that you get from Saussure. And what Peirce did is he opened that up into a system of signs and complicated. He's a logician, and he's like, no, there's this. But what you get into with that is discovery of, like, the doctrine of the Trinity is a deep reality. Like in our,
Yep.
like you
Yep.
can't. The Trinity is so ontological and
Yes.
real that even in our own basic experience, we're experiencing the Trinity. And
Hmm.
that's just so rich. And then with Girard and his mimetic theory and scapegoating, and so
Right.
so I think that's kind of where I've gotten to,
Hmm.
and in my journey as of late.
That's where you're
That's,
residing right now.
yeah, that's
I think we're
where
very
I'm playing around with those
yeah, I think we're
ideas.
very similar spots, by the way. I think we're very similar
Yeah,
perspectives, and
mystical,
I'm
little
just
bit
gonna yeah.
apophatic theology with a
Oh
hint of
yeah.
covenant theology, just
Sure.
sprinkled on for flavor. Bart,
Just a
yeah,
yeah. Just you get the amuse bouche with the Trinitarian
yeah,
theology, and then
yeah,
that informs,
yeah,
sort of everything else. And I'm pretty much there too. I
yeah.
think
Trinity's basic.
yeah, it is fundamental to knowing
Yeah.
anything in the world. You
Yes.
have to start with like Trinitarian theology. There's
Right.
no way out of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, totally.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think and I want it to shape as we talk about politics, like I'm trying to understand
Hmm.
how that fits together there, and even on my journey.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And
I'm with you there.
mine was similar to yours. I mean, I guess the difference. So my father grew up. His side of the family was more Democratic. My mom's side of the family was more Republican, and so I
Hmm.
just remember going
Sure.
to everybody's your family trips where you have to hear everybody talk about politics and you hear both sides, and and so I was always unsure. And I remember during the Bush years, one of the memories I have is seeing these people and these protesters in the paper covered with blood, paint, fake blood,
Right.
laying in the
Yeah. Yeah.
streets, and doing all these weird protests. And to me, I was like, yeah, why do Christians believe in war? And that was so weird to me. And
It's such an odd
yeah,
thing when you think about it
yeah,
right
I know,
away.
it's so
Especially
weird.
then.
I think our generation was kind of like if you were an elder millennial, there's a certain moment where you just have a huge existential crisis with the political scene, and like you're just like something better's got to happen. And yeah, so at first I was more of a socialist. I would have told you back then, and I didn't know what I was thinking about really, but
Yeah.
just kind of
The impulse, the
left
idea
searching.
of like,
Yeah.
like communal caring for each other, right? Like
Yeah,
that sort of very, very simplistic, which is
welfarist,
not ultimately socialism.
Yeah.
It's like the very simplistic impulse. It's like I kind of get that, but then when you broaden that out to like a violent state, it's like,
Yeah.
oh wait, never mind. That
Yeah.
definitely could never work.
Yeah, I guess like the
Especially
way I
in,
was thinking, and I guess it'd be like if like the universal income kind of welfareism, or like, hey, why can't we all just do that? And then that's what led me eventually on a journey, because I had a really good economics teacher in high school actually, who was an intern, and kind of got me interested in it because he had this view that, well, everything's economics, which I don't totally think, but
No.
yeah, but I knew that the problem was with economics. And so when I kind of began searching more, I started searching economics, and then discovered I was searching all these just really odd things like Marxism and everything else, and because I was trying to weigh everything, I was trying to find all the contrasts to everything, and I discovered Austrian economics. It was the perfect year, because that's when, right as I was getting into economics, Ron Paul started running for the first time in 2008. And I was like, yeah, this is it. And the more and more, I went through struggle there for a while, like, this can't be right, and then the more and more you get into it, the more I saw, the Ron Paul debates and stuff. I mean, yeah, he turned me.
Yeah.
And then I kind of floated away from it for a while during the second term Obama years, and then kind of was really frustrated by the time we got to Trump. And I started getting into more of because I was into continental stuff, like the hermeneutical Austrians, and sometimes you find some really like moderate libertarians there, and it's getting into Deirdre McCloskey and stuff, and kind of slowly kind of drifting into that, and kind of like, well, I guess this, and then by the time 2020 hit, you can feel something brewing. But as soon as the lockdowns hit, I'm like, holy cow, no, like everything's wrong. And so during 2020 really radicalized me. So I'm like, okay, that's it. I'm done with even the economics from, like you said, like Ann Capistan or like the desire for that, like it's gone. It's not that I don't think markets function, but I became much more like into like left libertarianism and challenging corporations and hyper centralization, and so yeah, for me, decentralized is the future, and the centralism is just crazy. But
it's the death of us. The
hyper centralized bureaucratic stuff. If it's I in theory I leave out, because hey, maybe the church, it won't be centralized, but it'll be kings laying down their crowns before the Lord.
I'll vibe that all day. But other than that, forget it.
Yeah. So like the holy orders, I've taken a liking to, and high church and liturgy, but as far as like the stuff that isn't organic, and it's not voluntary, and it's not it's coercive, and it's cancel culture and stuff like that's, I think, just what is really just disturbed me. So that's my
Definitely.
political
Well, I would say like
journey.
you and I are probably not going to vote anytime soon in
Yeah.
any election.
No.
If we can conclude it like
Yeah.
in terms of like our political perspective,
Yeah.
it's like it's really complicated,
Yeah.
and to think that you can just simplify this right left paradigm, like you think like the right is all evil because it's not the left, but like,
Yeah.
or if you think the left is all evil because it's not right, it's like you guys. I think there is like a psychological sort of warfare happening in that frame, and
Absolutely.
not that we're going to get into that right now, but so for us,
Mhm.
it's like we're not voting anytime soon. We're just here to sort of engage. I
And
think
process
Austrian
it.
economics is a really helpful tool of recognizing corruption
Yeah.
and bad, really bad policy.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that it does that is better than the other because economics is a young discipline, relatively speaking. It's young.
It is, yeah, I agree.
And so what Austrian economics does is it helps you kind of uncover maybe which I think goes back to that mimetic desire, how we value things and desire things, and that we really make decisions and they have market effects based on our subjective idea. It's the subjectivism that I still hang on to, and the kind of Hayekian view that they really think they've proven, even with like Don Lavoie, peer-reviewed articles and stuff, that heavy centralization, even in corporations, makes it clunky and slow. And so I think that Austrian economics can uncover that, but I think it's interesting when it's rooted more in like it actually was in some circles and had gone out into, which be an interesting podcast, but phenomenology. I think it's interesting when it's teased out in phenomenology. But
I completely agree. I think if we're too neoliberal with our anthropology, I think it can poison the well of Austrian economics in a way that I find very unhelpful. So.
Yeah, that's good. So, well, thanks for joining us. And you still with me, Anthony? He's going slow and freezing because it might be my internet. So, are you there?
I was freezing up there. Apologies.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm here. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, anyways, thank you for joining us, and we're excited to take you on this journey with us. If you like it, subscribe and help us out. If you're watching it on a platform that can give crypto, hey, we can make better stuff.
We'll take
crypto. So,
yeah.
All right. Thanks for joining us.